James Robertson, a joiner from Kirkcaldy, is an unlikely vigilante.
I think the unusual feature about this case is that here we have a man who is a hard-working family man who really doesn't go out at all, but he's somebody who has had problems with his neighbours. He has done his best to resolve those problems by legal means. He's involved the police umpteen times, but at the end of the day it's had no effect whatsoever, and he's really just been pushed into a corner, and as he sees it, he has no alternative but to take the law into his own hands. Because of that, he could be facing between 5 and 10 years imprisonment.
The suburban calm of Winifred Crescent was shattered one Sunday afternoon when James Robertson led a group of friends round to a neighbour's house to sort out a long-running dispute. There was a fight, the police were called, and Mr. Robertson was charged with a breach of the peace and assaulting two of the occupants of number 35 Winifred Crescent, Deborah Buckley and Ian Coole. 6 weeks later, Ian Coole was rushed into the Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy. There had been a second fight outside a pub, and he had been stabbed. The knife had punctured a lung and grazed his heart. In the early hours of the next morning, James Robertson admitted being involved in the second fight, and according to police statements, he confessed to stabbing Ian Coole. Later that day, he was charged with attempted murder.
I'm not even really very sure if he fully understands how serious the situation is. Obviously he knows he's facing a very serious charge, but he doesn't know everything that's involved, and I don't think he even fully appreciates the weight of evidence against him.
It's 18 months since the stabbing, and James Robertson is now standing trial at the High Court in Edinburgh for the attempted murder of Ian Coole. He also faces 4 charges of breach of the peace and assault, which are the result of the first fight at Winifred Crescent.
Court.
The first witness to be called by the prosecution is the man at the heart of the neighbourhood feud, Martin Neavy.
I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will speak the truth.
That I will speak the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Deputy.
The advocate prosecuting the case is Ted Bowen.
I want to ask you, Mr. Neavy, about certain events which may have taken place a year ago past February, on a Sunday afternoon, the 2nd of February. You remember something happening then?
Yes, I was involved in an incident with Mr. James Robertson.
You see Mr. James Robertson here?
Yes.
Can you point him out, please?
The gentleman over there.
Sitting between the 2 policemen?
Yes. And one of my friends alerted me to the presence of Mr. Robertson and his brothers all standing outside the gate.
And what were they doing?
Gesturing us for us to come out and fight.
Were they holding anything?
Yes, they had several weapons, sticks and poles.
And did anyone go out?
My girlfriend, Mrs. Buckley, went out and opened the gate. Was asking what they wanted.
Yeah.
And she was struck upon the head by Mr. Robertson.
What happened next then, Mr. Neavy?
Mr. Coole also witnessed my girlfriend being struck, and he went out to retaliate against Mr. Robertson.
And what happened then?
Mr. Robertson wrestled him to the ground outside the gate and started hitting him on the head with a hammer.
A hammer?
Yes.
And can you describe the blows to us?
Yes, his arm was raised quite far up. He was striking him on top of the head repeatedly.
And how did that end?
His brothers were saying, "That's enough, Jim, that's enough," to him. And in the melee, somebody shouted and gained Mr. Robertson's attention for a brief second, and Mr. Coole scrambled clear.
Thank you very much.
Credibility is absolutely crucial in this case. It's what the whole case focuses on. I will be attacking the character of certain Crown witnesses. I will be putting to them that they have been harassing not only Mr. Robertson and his family for a long time, both before and after these incidents took place, but also other people in the street where they live. They've made life hell for a lot of people. According to you, Mr. Nevy, this ill feeling, this grudge on Mr. Robertson's part towards you stemmed from an incident months previously when you had done something to a gate. He wanted you to repair a gate.
Yes.
Is that right? What happened to his gate?
I accidentally bumped it slightly with the rear of my car.
The rear of your car. Now, did anything happen to you as a result of driving your car that day?
No.
Did the police come to see you?
No, I can't remember them seeing me, no.
You can't remember whether they came to see you or
I
not?
don't think they did, no.
Is that because the police have been to see you so many times, Mr. Nevy, that you can't remember what they were up to see you about one incident as compared to another incident?
That's not true, no.
And you know very well that the reason why there is ill feeling between you and Mr. Robertson is that you believe Mr. Robertson shopped you to the police at the time you ran into his garden gate, and the police claimed that you were driving with no insurance at the time. Isn't that right?
No, that's not right.
So nothing like that happened at all?
I was prosecuted possibly a week or so later, I believe,
What for?
for having no insurance on the car.
You put 2 and 2 together, Mr. Nevy, and made 5 and suspected Mr. Robertson of having shopped you to the police for driving a car without insurance.
That's not true, it's not what I thought, no.
That didn't cross your mind at all?
No.
And after that, Mr. Nevy, your harassment of Mr. Robertson didn't stop. Isn't that right?
He did stop. There was no harassment took place.
Did you not go and spray the word beast on the wall of Mr. Robertson's house?
No.
What about ordering taxis up to go to Mr. Robertson's house and ordering Chinese meals to be delivered to his house?
No, I'm unaware of these details, no.
What about spitting at his wife then?
I believe I was accused of that, yet again.
The police were called again about that, isn't that
I
right?
wasn't prosecuted.
Because you were harassing him at every opportunity you could get, Mr. Nevy, isn't that right?
No, this is not true.
Well, roughly how many people did Mr. Robertson bring round to your door that afternoon?
4 or 5, I believe.
And your girlfriend at that time, Deborah Buckley, goes out to confront them all on her own.
No, I was putting my shoes on and ready to go outside.
But you were quite happy to let her go out to the front gate and face this mob that are all armed to the teeth.
I believed it was me he was after, so she was in no danger.
Mr. Nevy, that, like the rest of your evidence, is just a pack of lies.
Not true.
You started a vendetta against Mr. Robertson because you thought he had shopped you to the police, and you were the one that was armed on the afternoon of the 2nd of February of last year. Isn't that right?
This is not true. Certainly not true.
And despite attempts by Mr. Robertson to try to get the matter sorted out with a verbal confrontation with you to explain to you what the situation really was, you just were not interested in that at all. Isn't that right?
I was trying to escape with my head still on my shoulders at that moment.
Martin Nevy's evidence was corroborated by his girlfriend, Deborah Buckley. According to her, they had been spending Sunday afternoon at home with some friends when James Robertson and 4 men suddenly appeared at their garden gate, brandishing weapons.
What were they doing?
Shouting and swearing and asking for Martin to come out so that they could beat him up.
Can you remember the exact words that were being used?
Just get effing Martin out here now, because we want him, and that was sort of basically what I could remember.
What did you do?
I went to the front door to find out why he was round again, because it wasn't the first time he'd done this, Ken. And when I went out, he said he wanted Martin. And I asked him, well, do you want to sort it out with you and Martin? And he said, aye. And I bent down to open the gate, and I got hit over the head with a metal pole for no reason at all.
Who hit you?
Mr. Robinson.
James Robertson.
Yes.
And did you see what he hit you with?
I'm not sure if it was a metal pole or a wooden pole, but it was definitely a pole of some kind.
And can you indicate to us whereabouts you were struck?
Just outside my head, behind my ear.
That's behind the left ear. Did you see anything of what happened outside after that?
Well, I see Mr. Robinson hitting Ian Cool over the head with a hammer or a pole or something. But that was from the living room window again while I was on the phone to the police lady.
Where was that happening?
That was actually right outside the front door, just the other side of my garden fence. It was about 10 yards in front of the window.
And where was Mr. Cool?
He was on the floor at that time, I think, at that point. Sort of holding his head, Ken.
And who was hitting him?
Mr. Robinson, James Robinson.
And how did that finish?
I've no idea, because by that time I was sort of in the living room regaining consciousness, Ken. I mean, I was conscious, but I was sort of in a daze, Ken, with being hit over the head. So I just sat down in the living room and cried, basically.
Thank you.
So that the ladies and gentlemen can understand clearly what's been happening to you, you've been troubled not just by Mr. Robertson as a neighbour, but you've had trouble from other neighbours in the area.
Yes.
Is that right? What sort of trouble have you had with them?
Just accusations of shouting at deaf and dumb people, and I haven't, Ken, and it caused a lot of stress to me, and I ended up on medication off the doctor through it.
That's obviously distressed you. What other neighbours have you had trouble from?
None, as far as I can think, apart from Mr. and Mrs. Johnson's pal, but she happens to be an alcoholic who I found in her back garden one time, totally drunk, and the children were in the house on their own, and she started accusing me of doing things that I hadn't done, apart from pick her up out of the garden. But other than that, not as far as I can remember, none.
What about Mr. and Mrs. Fife? Have you had trouble with them before?
Fife.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, that was the day that one of her children, who was 10 years old, hit my daughter, who was 3 years old at the time. And I went round to ask about, could she possibly punish him or at least shout at him? And she called me an English cow and slammed the door on my face.
Now, when all this trouble erupted outside your house on the 2nd of February last year, you went back into the house and you were dazed and you were just very upset by it all.
Yes, because this man had came round to my house causing trouble.
Who was doing all the shouting that afternoon?
Well, I'd say it was the Robinsons sort of gang, Ken. And once he started, I don't even know what they were shouting about.
Mrs. Buckley, you're telling a pack of lies
No,
about
I'm sorry.
what happened.
I've got no reason to lie. And besides, I've just sworn the oath, and I wouldn't lie under it.
And the truth about what happened that afternoon was that James Robertson went up to your house, and he certainly made indications that he wanted to speak to Martin Nevey, but there were no weapons. of any kind in his hand or in any of his friends' hands at that time.
And you call me a liar? There was plenty of weapons. How would I have been hit over the head with a metal pole or a wooden pole if the man didn't have a weapon? Did I just punch myself and pretend? No.
Well, that brings me to my next suggestion, Mrs. Buckley, and that is that you were not hit in the head at all.
I beg your pardon, but I was. A police constable actually felt the lump on the side of my head and took a statement from me.
And if you were hit in the head, it certainly was not as a result of anything James Robertson did to you.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Because there were bricks and bits of rubble flying from your group, isn't that right?
No, that is totally untrue. I'd have no reason to lie about a man hitting me.
Thank you very much.
That's all. Thank you. Let's break at this stage then, ladies and gentlemen. Can I remind you of the two things that I've always said at adjournments? Firstly, hold the evidence as completely and as carefully in your heads as you can, but avoid the temptation of jumping to any conclusion. Keep the decision-making process until the time for that comes. And secondly, be very careful not to talk about the case with anyone else outside yourselves.
Court.
The victim of the near-fatal stabbing, Ian Coole, had also been involved in the first fight at 35 Winifred Crescent. He's the next prosecution witness and says that he saw James Robertson hitting Deborah Buckley.
What did he hit her with?
I didn't know at the time. It was a short instrument, it was round, that's all I could see at the time.
And whereabouts did he hit her?
On the side of the head, about there someplace, or the back of the neck.
Did you do anything when that happened?
I ran out. After what I seen what happened, I ran out and sort of proceeded towards him, and I grabbed a hold of him, and I could feel that it was me that was getting it next. I was the one that was getting hit. I got hit several times.
Sorry, where were you being hit?
On the head and down my back and on my elbows and things like that.
What do you remember next?
I could remember everybody shouting each other. I don't know who specifically.
Now, that was Sunday the 2nd of February. Mm-hmm. Did you see Mr. Robertson, this man here, some weeks later?
I did.
Where was that?
The Country Inn.
The Country Inn?
It's a public house on the outskirts of Kirkcaldy.
Was that about the end of March?
27th of March, I believe.
27th of March, right. Were you drinking?
I'd had a couple. About 4 or 5 pints and a few Southern Comforts.
4 or 5 pints, 2 or 3 Southern Comforts? How much longer did you spend in the pub?
We were there till it finished.
What time was that?
The time everybody was leaving, I think it possibly about 12:30. I was waiting for a taxi.
And were you alone or were you with your friends at this time?
My friends were there, but they were standing just behind me. There was a crowd of people, not a lot, but like people waiting on taxis, and I was standing. And as I turned round, I could see Mr. Robertson coming, and he was just sort of lifting his arms to take hold of us. And that's when I just grabbed hold of him, and then we were rolling about on the grass.
Now, was there anything in his hands at that time?
Not that I could see.
So you took hold of each other and were rolling down the grass?
I was on top of Mr. Robertson, and I think we were possibly punching each other. And I could feel, what I thought was I got knocked on the head with something. I didn't realise what it was at the time. And I could feel the warmth, the blood running down my head. And at that's when I stopped, I started to panic. And I could feel it was like, it wasn't a sharp pain, it was like getting the wind knocked out of me in my side. It was like getting punched. And then I could feel the warmth again, with the blood running down me. That's when I realised someone was up and I couldn't breathe.
Two of Ian Coole's friends later gave evidence. One of them, Michael Sampson, told the court that James Robertson had threatened him with a knife after using it to stab Ian Coole.
The odd thing about it is Coole, the man who finishes up being stabbed, one of Nevy's friends, does not see James Robertson with a weapon at all. He does not see a knife in his hands at all. Now, the defence to that particular aspect of the charge, the actual stabbing, is that it wasn't James Robertson because he didn't have a knife, that it could only have been one or both of the other two people who were very, very close by at that time. That was Coole's friend. On the night of the 27th of March, you've told us that you were a wee bit tipsy, a few pints, a few southern comforts. What about your pals? What sort of state were they in?
I would say they were kind of drunk. They still understand them. They wouldn't been a pain or nothing. They weren't falling a bit, but you could tell they'd had a few drinks.
They were really drunk, Mr. Coole. Let's not beat about the bush. A pair of them were really drunk.
Eh? I know what really drunk is. I've seen people that are really drunk and they weren't really drunk. They'd had a good few. They were tipsy. They were staggering a bit, but they weren't falling or crawling about the ground being sick or nothing.
Well, if you don't agree with the phrase really drunk, what about the phrase fighting drunk? Were they fighting drunk?
They came if they were fighting at all.
Well, we'll maybe come to that later, Mr. Coole. You want to get back at Mr. Robertson, you've told us that. The idea had crossed your mind about giving him a hammering, isn't that right? You know fine well, Mr. Coole, that that is exactly what you did as soon as you got outside and saw Mr. Robertson. You were the one that started the whole fight outside, isn't that right?
No, that's not true.
And in fact, you took James Robertson so much by surprise when you came out of the entrance of the pub that he didn't even have time to get his hands out of his pockets, never mind produce a knife. Isn't that right?
No, that's not true.
The injuries that Mr. Robertson sustained were sustained not just as a result of what you were doing, but as a result of what your two pals that were still left at the pub with you rained on him. Isn't that right?
I don't know.
If you look at the photographs, Crown Production number 1, and if you turn to the first photograph, did you do all of that damage to him?
No, I'd only punched him about once or twice. I couldn't have done all that.
Can you explain how Mr. Robertson got all the injuries that we can see in these photographs?
No.
You see, it could be explained away this way, Mr. Coole, could it not? That you realised or were told after you had been stabbed that it wasn't Mr. Robertson that stabbed you, that it was in fact one of your pals who had been joining in the fight, trying to stab Mr. Robertson, managed to hit you instead.
No, that's true.
Right? And that what you say, as far as his involvement on that particular day, is just a pack of lies.
No, that's not true.
Right? Thank you very much.
That's all. Thank you.
Very good, isn't it?
Eh?
Doesn't look very good.
We're not in any worse a position than when we started, and I mean, we've got these two out anyway. So, I mean, it's up to the impression that you make on them. I mean, I'll be saying to them at the end of the day, they can find you guilty of a breach of the peace. You shouldn't have gone there. And even if you did nothing, you shouldn't have gone there. So, I mean, that's plain as a pikestaff, and it was bound to cause trouble just going up there. But the rest of it, you maintain that.
Jury make up their mind this afternoon?
No, it'll be tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
24 prosecution witnesses have now given evidence, and the time has come for James Robertson to enter the witness box to speak in his own defence.
Mr. Robertson, you will have heard me many times in the course of this trial say to witnesses, could you please speak more loudly and more clearly? So will you please try to keep your voice up as loudly as you possibly can?
Yes.
Now, I understand you have hearing difficulties too.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
What's the problem?
It's totally deaf in my left ear and I'm slightly deaf in my right ear.
Right. We've heard about Martin Neavy and Deborah Buckley, who lived at 35 Winifred Crescent. How did you come to know them?
Well, Martin Neville kept on sort of threatening my kids and that. Before that, he bumped into my gate with his car, and I went round to his house to ask if he was going to fix my gate. And at first he said he was going to fix it, but none really came of it, none happened.
After the incident involving your garden gate, Mr. Robertson, how did your relationship with Mr. Neavy progress?
It went from bad to worse.
And who was responsible for that happening?
Martin Neville.
In what way did he become responsible for that?
First instance was kids were out playing in the cul-de-sac.
Keep your voice up.
The kids were all playing out in the cul-de-sac and I was coming back from the shop. Martin Neville was in front of me and I seen him speaking to the kids and drawing his hand across like that.
You're drawing your hand across your throat?
Across his throat.
Right. Why did you think he was after you?
Well, when he bumped into the gate with his car, somebody had told the police that he couldn't drive, never had any insurance on his car, and he blamed it on me.
And was it you who had told the police about that? How did you deal with these things happening?
We kept on calling the police up.
And did the police respond to your calls?
Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't.
According to James Robertson, the Kirkcaldy police were so reluctant to protect him and his family, they even suggested he should take on the role of vigilante.
He said, no, I said, I'm not going to charge anybody. He says, we know what they're like. He says, we've had a lot of problems with them. I said, well, what do you expect? What do you want me to do? I said, I've had you up a lot of times. He says, look, he says, off the record, he says, we better just take them someplace and give them a good hiding.
After simmering for 2 years, confrontation was inevitable, and it came on that Sunday afternoon in February.
I was going along to the skip to drop some rubbish off the grass and that, and as I was going along, I seen Martin Neville and another person, and he started shouting at me, swearing at me at the side of the road. On the way back home again, he was still there, started shouting, swearing at me, saying he was going to get me and everything. So I decided I'd had enough. Went up to get my brother and says, would you come down? I'm going up to Martin's house to have a word with him.
What actually did you intend to say or do?
Well, I was going to ask him why he was harassing the kids when it was me he was really trying to get it. It was me he was after.
Well, tell the ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Robertson, about all the weapons that you took with you when you went up to 35 Winifred Crescent.
Never had any weapons at all.
You didn't have any weapons?
No, none at all.
But you've heard Martin Neavy and Deborah Buckley and Ian Coole talk about the hammer and the metal pole and bricks and bottles and things that you all had.
Yes, I heard that, yes.
Did you have weapons like
no,
that?
You're telling a pack of lies.
When you got to Martin Neavy's house, what was the first thing that you did?
We waited outside the gate because we seen them all looking out the window.
And what happened?
Buckley come diving out the door, started shouting and swearing at me.
Mm-hmm. Did you intend to fight in any way at all when you went to number 35?
No, not at all.
Mm-hmm. And as you were looking over, you say somebody else came out?
I came out.
What happened?
I heard somebody shouting, look out, turned round, and there was somebody trying to hit me with a hammer.
Now, who was that?
I take it was Ian Coole. I didn't know at that time who it was.
And where were you hit?
In my arm, my left arm, twice.
How did you come to be hit there?
Well, somebody shouted, look out, and I turned round and I seen the hammer coming towards my face. I put my hand up like that, hit me twice on the arm.
Did you hit him with a hammer at any stage?
No, it was him that hit me with a hammer.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, definitely.
At any time did you have a hammer in your hand?
No.
When did you next see Ian Cool?
The concern.
And what was the next thing that caused you problems?
Yeah, when I went outside the concern at night time, about back at 12, I went outside and started talking to a group of women. And the next thing I knew, somebody had shouted at Robertson. The next thing I knew, I was on my back, and this person was on top of me.
Right. Do you know who that person was?
Not at that time, no, but I do now.
Who was it?
It's Ian Cool.
Advocate Deputy.
Let's just be clear about this, Mr. Robertson. You get outside the country inn, and this incident started when somebody shouted Robertson,
Yes.
and the next thing is that he was on top of you.
Yes.
And you said, if I've noted you correctly, it was Ian Cool, but that you didn't know him at the time.
No.
Well, how did you not know him if you'd been involved in a fight with him on the 2nd of February?
Sorry?
How did you not know Mr. Cool on the 28th of March if you'd been involved in a fight with him on the 2nd of February?
I'm not a man for faces.
So, Cool attacked you. That's what it comes to.
Yes.
And you say you never got your hands out of your pockets.
I had my hands in my pockets.
Is that right, Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
In the course of this, I hesitate to call it fight, but encounter with Mr. Cool, you never got your hands out of your pockets.
My hands were in my pockets all the time.
So this was entirely one-sided. He had a hold of you, he was doing things to you, you were doing nothing to him.
Yes, that's correct.
But you say that you were conscious of two other people joining in.
Yes.
See, you've come into this court and you've blamed Mr. Sampson and Mr. Ritchie for sticking a knife in Mr. Cool.
Yes.
You appreciate that?
Yes.
A serious allegation.
Yes, I know that.
Except, I take it, Mr. Robertson, that Ritchie and Sampson are friends of Mr. Cool.
Yes.
Does it not strike you as a bit strange that one of them should stick a knife in him?
Yes, it is a bit strange.
A lot of witnesses have been telling lies in this case, Mr. Robertson.
Sorry, could you speak up, please?
A lot of witnesses have been telling lies in this case,
Yes.
but everything you've told us is true.
Yes.
You accept, don't you, that it doesn't make much sense that Mr. Cool came to be stabbed?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense at all.
The most likely person to have done that on this occasion was you.
No, not at all.
Would you not agree that you were the most likely one to do it? You were the one who
No.
was fighting with him,
No, I wasn't fighting them at all.
because you couldn't get your hands out of your pockets.
Pockets.
And you're telling the jury that on oath, are you, Mr. Robertson? You never got your hands out of your pockets.
Sorry?
You're telling the jury that on oath, that you never got your hands out of your pockets.
I swear on my children's deaths that I didn't get my hands out of my pockets.
Thank you.
That's all.
James Robertson has said all that he can. Tomorrow he will find out whether the jury believe him and where his future lies. Before the jury consider their verdict, they will hear speeches from both the prosecution and defence.
When I start to think about my speech to the jury, I suppose I really start as soon as the first word of evidence is spoken. As the trial goes on, I jot down notes to myself as to what points I should be making to the jury, what points come up in evidence that are good jury points.
The final words of this charge are, and did attempt to murder him. Now, the question for a jury in a case where attempted murder is alleged is simply this: if the victim had died, would that have constituted murder? So what you've got here, ladies and gentlemen, is a straightforward issue in a sense. Did the accused stab Mr. Cool, or is that doubtful? Could it have been someone else? Are you satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the accused was responsible?
Even as the Advocate Depute is addressing the jury, I'm still writing away because I usually find that there are things that he says to the jury that I want to pick up on.
I would suggest to you, and it's only a suggestion, it's entirely for you, that you may think that the accused was not truthful in certain areas. For example, that the whole incident on the 2nd of February was one-sided, that he had his hands in his pockets throughout the encounter with Cool. Obviously, he is not truthful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is fundamentally the basis on which the Crown say to you in this case, if you accept the evidence, it is open to you and would be appropriate for you to convict.
Ms McMenamin.
Thank you, Lordship. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if any of you have ever served in a jury before. I don't even know if any of you have ever been in a courtroom before. But I'm sure you've all read reports of trials in the newspapers. And you know the sort of thing that I mean. You pick up the paper, there's a big headline, a trial's just started, and there's the coverage of the first day's evidence. And you get the paper the next day, and you read the next instalment, and you think to yourselves, well, this is a guilty man, if ever I saw one. Then, lo and behold, the end of the week comes round, the trial's finished, you buy a newspaper, and there's another headline. Man accused of daylight robbery walks free. And you are absolutely astounded, ladies and gentlemen, and you say to yourselves, how could that possibly happen? What kind of jury were sitting in that case that would let a man walk free on the evidence that I read about on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't know the answer to that question then, I'm sure you must know the answer to that question now. And it hardly needs saying either, ladies and gentlemen, that in this case, your determination of a witness's credibility, whether it's telling the truth or not, is going to depend so much, not on what a witness says, but on the impression that he or she made on you as the evidence was given. Because let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, taken at face value, things don't look too good for Mr. Robertson as far as charges 2, 3 and 4 go. Because there you have, as the Advocate Depute says, 5 witnesses, all coming in saying Deborah Buckley was hit in the head, Ian Poole was hit with a hammer. They've painted a picture, ladies and gentlemen. They've got James Robertson coming round to number 35 like Rambo from his own house. That is the picture that is painted of James Robertson. Look at him sitting there. He could hardly hit his way through a paper bag, never mind emerge from a garage weighed down by all these weapons. And what he did with them, nobody can tell us. So where does that leave you? But just look with me briefly, please, at these so-called credible, reliable witnesses. Look at Martin Nevey. Is he a truthful, honest, reliable witness? This is a man who hates James Robertson, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think you're going to have any doubt at all coming to that conclusion. And then Deborah Buckley, ladies and gentlemen, a well-matched partner for Martin Nevey, you might well think, but a courteous one, or so she would have you believe. This is a lady who was merely bending down to open the garden gate and put a brick beside the garden gate so that Mr. Robertson could come in and have a chat to Martin Nevey and perhaps sort things out. If he had come in, she tells you, she might even have made him a cup of coffee. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what the Edinburgh equivalent of this phrase is, but where I come from, the response to that is, do you think I came up the Clyde on a water biscuit? It's entirely up to you what you make of that evidence. The way she paints it, you might think, ladies and gentlemen, is like that scene from High Noon, where Gary Cooper, in the form of Martin Nevey, goes off to face the man who hates him. There he is sitting there. And the Grace Kelly of Winifred Crescent sits in the house wondering what to do, and she decides she's going to go out and join her man. That is the picture painted by Deborah Buckley, you might think, ladies and gentlemen. I turn at last, ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased to hear, to the main charge in this indictment, and that is charge 5. And this is where sheer common sense comes back into it. Who was it that was looking for trouble that night, ladies and gentlemen, at the Country Inn pub? Was it James Robertson, who was out for a quiet night, a rare night out with his wife? Or was it the ones who were reminiscing about the events of the 2nd of February while they're in drinking in the Country Inn pub? Who was it that by closing time had worked himself up into a frenzy of hate for James Robertson, ladies and gentlemen? It was Ian Coole. The law has failed James Robertson so many times before, ladies and gentlemen. He's counted 14 times that he's called the police in the past, and the police have done absolutely nothing. His only hope for justice in all of this lies with each and every one of you. I ask you on behalf of James Robertson to acquit him on every single charge that is left before you on the indictment. Let him go back to his wife and his family. Let him go back to doing some hard work, and let him go back to try to find some peace in Winifred Crescent now that Martin Nevey and his girlfriend are no longer there.
May I start, ladies and gentlemen, by saying a word to you about the respective functions which you and I have to perform in a trial of this kind. My function as the judge in the case is to control the procedure and to deal with all matters of law. Now, your function, on the other hand, as the jury in the case, is to deal with all matters of fact. Now, that means that it is for you and for you alone to decide what facts are proved and what facts are not proved, what witnesses you believe, what witnesses you reject, which witnesses you regard as reliable, which witnesses you regard as unreliable.
The judge's speech to the jury lasts just over an hour.
I'm going to ask you formally to retire just in a moment, but I would suggest that before you start applying your minds to the charges, you should have lunch first. Don't try and discuss the case over lunch. It is not a course that assists digestion, nor may it assist a proper deliberation on the case. So have lunch first, and then proceed to consider your verdicts on each of these charges, which I now invite you to retire and do.
The jury will return verdicts on charges 2, 3 and 4, a breach of the peace and 2 assaults, which all relate to the first fight at Winifred Crescent. Finally, they will give a verdict on charge 5, attempted murder.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who speaks for you? Please stand up, madam. Have the jury considered and agreed upon their verdicts? What is the jury's verdict on charge 2?
Guilty.
Is that verdict unanimous or by a majority?
Unanimous.
What is the jury's verdict on charge 3?
Not guilty.
Is that verdict unanimous or by a majority?
Unanimous.
The jury's verdict on charge 4?
Not guilty.
Is that verdict unanimous or by a majority?
Majority.
And finally, what is the jury's verdict on charge 5?
Not guilty.
Yes. Is that verdict unanimous or by a majority?
Majority.
Please sit down, madam.
Advocate Deputy.
The verdict of the jury, and having regard to the fact that the accused has stood trial on a charge of attempted murder and has had this matter hanging over his head for some time, in my view it is inappropriate for the Crown to make any motion to your Lordship, and I don't propose to do so.
In light of the jury's verdict, James Robertson, and of the attitude taken by the Crown, you're free to go.
Nothing personal, but I hope we don't see you again.